Hello everyone, today we'll be talking about interleukin 6, the double-edged cytokine, friend, 4 or 5 starter, and we'll be looking at its classical and trans signaling pathways, and later we'll be talking about its clinical relevance. Let's get started. Like I said, it's a double-edged cytokine, means it has pro-inflammatory signal and an anti-inflammatory signal, and it all depends on the context. And its anti-inflammatory property. It's mainly through its classical signaling, which we'll be seeing in subsequent slides, and the mechanism of classical signaling. It depends on two-part receptor complex, and the receptor is a membrane-bound interleukin 6 receptor. When the interleukin goes and binds with this membrane-bound interleukin 6 receptor, the complex recruits a second protein called GP130, glycoprotein 130. And after when this complex and recruits this second G protein, glycoprotein, they undergo dimerization and activating JAK-STAT pathway inside the cell. Then the JAK-STAT will lead to activation of specific gene in the DNA, and depending on cell, it acts. And where does this happen? Where are these membrane-bound interleukin 6 receptor present? And it's present only in few sites like liver cells, where it's helpful for acute phase proteins production. Then there are WBCs like macrophages and neutrophils and megakaryocytes. Then why it matters? Why is this classical signaling? Why are we talking about it now? Because this is the very vital for survival. It helps your liver respond to injury and tells your immune system to gear up for a fight. And when we use drugs like tocilizumab, which is an anti-interleukin 6 receptor, it blocks both the classical signaling and the trans signaling, and it will be of very importance, like we'll see in the future subsequent slides. And coming to the pro-inflammatory part of the interleukin 6, it is through trans signaling. And how does this trans signaling activate? Sometimes, like some cells break their receptor and it goes into blood and it becomes soluble part. And this soluble interleukin receptors, when they are free floating, when interleukin 6 binds to this, they go and they both bind. And when they both bind, they still cannot activate because we need a second protein, GP130. Since it's soluble, they're just roaming around, and when they find GP130, which is present almost in all cells, they go attached and they activate JAK-STAT pathway, and this is very bad actually. This is a pictorial representation of what I just said. There is interleukin 6 binding to soluble interleukin receptor, which they form a complex, then they recruit this GP130. This shall activate the JAK-STAT pathway, and yes. Coming to why trans signaling, and why is trans signaling important? Because it causes chronic disease. Trans signaling, since I said it's pro-inflammatory, it causes chronic disease. But how is it causing? In a healthy individual, there's a buffer like a soluble GP130. These soluble GP130, they bind to interleukin 6 and soluble interleukin 6 receptor complex, and they stop them from causing trouble. But when the interleukin 6 production is too high for too long, this buffer is overwhelmed and leads to chronic disease. Coming to autoimmune disorders which are relevant in this context of interleukin 6, rheumatoid arthritis. It is one of the condition where interleukin 6 plays some very big role, and we have drugs targeting interleukin 6 in this rheumatoid arthritis. And we have cardiovascular disease which is linked to interleukin 6 because it promotes plaque buildup and it increases risk of heart attacks. And in the gut we have IBD, particularly Crohn's disease, where transsignaling prevents apoptosis of inflammatory T cells in the gut, and these immortal T cells stay active for too long, causing constant damage to the intestinal lining. And the cytokine storm, like we see in sepsis or COVID-19, it's a very main role which will lead to systemic vascular leakage and organ failure. And coming to the therapeutic importance, like we have tocilizumab, which is blocks both membrane interleukin receptor and soluble interleukin receptor, and since it affects both the good and bad side of the interleukin 6, patients are vulnerable for infections, and that is one of the problem. And future we are coming up with selective blockers such as olamkisept that only block trans signaling. So this treats the disease without compromising the liver or primary immune response.